Hey y'all. Good evening, you guys. How y'all doing? Wait, I sound funny. Hold on one second. That's better. Okay. Hey y'all. Good evening. Let me turn this music down. Hope y'all doing well. Thanks for joining us tonight. We're going to have a discussion on Malcolm X, and I'm going to bring up Gardis Watts. Before I do, I just want to say good evening to everyone. Potato, Cynthia, Douglas, Wyoming Gal, Brandon. Hey, everybody. Thanks for being here. We have a lot to talk about. I'm going to bring Gardis Watts up because, I'm just the background. I appreciate his knowledge. And Big Mike will be joining us a little later. Okay, hold on one second. Let's bring up Gardis Watts. Hey, Gardis, hold on one second. I got to take this photo down. How are you today?
I'm okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You sound great. How's everything going this evening?
Everything is good. Just trying to stay warm.
Yeah, it's bitter out there. I tell you, it's bitter
Mm-hmm.
out there. I thank you for joining us to talk about the 60-year. Tell me the correct way to say it. The 60-year anniversary of Malcolm S. Assassination sounds horrible. I don't know how to say it correctly.
Yeah. So there was I remember a couple of years ago there was an issue of saying anniversary because when you're talking about anniversary, you're talking about a celebration of something. So a
Mhm.
celebration of something good. And
Mhm.
obviously this was not good at all. So I think the more appropriate word is maybe remembrance or not even a commemoration, but more of a remembrance.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
remembrance of this tragic death of Malcolm X.
Yeah. And to this day, 60 years later, I've been reading about it all day. It's still conspiracies out there about it, how did it happen, um, who who did it, and everyone has their theories. But can you tell us, has anyone been charged with? I did read about it, but I would love you to just take it away, Gardis Watts.
Yeah, so before I go into that, just quick background of Minister Malcolm X, or Malik El Haj Shabazz, as his Sunni name was. Um, they, I guess, what people would call him in the annals of history is as a civil rights leader. I don't see that in Malcolm, even though he was there during the same time as Dr. King and some of the other civil rights leaders. But as you know, and we've briefly talked about this with King, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King were very much at odds as far as ideology of Black liberation, and many of the other people who aligned with King were targets of Malcolm X's critique of the nonviolent resistance movement. But Malcolm X, just very quickly, he grew up. He grew up. Well, he was born in Omaha, Nebraska. Parents moved him to Lansing, Michigan. He had several brothers, and I think two sisters that in his family. And so they moved to Lansing, Michigan. His father was a Seventh-day Adventist minister who was also a Garveyite, and his mom was um, a light skinned a woman from Grenada. And so as his father was preaching Garveyite, Garveyism, he was also the target of the Ku Klux Klan, who was in Lansing, Michigan at the time. And unfortunately, his fate was sealed when the Klan basically murdered his father. Well, without having the father as the provider there, his Malcolm X's mom had issues taking care of the children, and they ended up in foster homes because she was committed to an insane institution or an institution, mental institution. So Malcolm had to live in foster care. Unfortunately, with foster care back then, as it is today, it sprouted something bad in Malcolm, as far as him getting into the criminal life, because of the fact that he left these foster homes and basically was on the streets a lot. So he learned a lot from the streets. Now, what's so interesting about Malcolm is that when he was in school, he was a very smart student, straight A's and everything, president of the class. But he felt like he couldn't get anything out of school, so he left school. I think before high school, or maybe in high school, if I can remember. And then, he started to live a criminal life. Lived that life for a couple of years until he was incarcerated for burglary in Boston. Spent time in jail. Was able to reflect in jail about his issues, because he ran into this guy named I think his name was Burgundy, and Burgundy was the guy who basically taught him a lot about himself as a black man. Now, what's interesting is, and I know a lot of people like references the film Malcolm X, the Spike Lee movie, and I think that actually sparked a lot of people, including myself, to learn more about Malcolm X and his influence. While the film itself was kind of problematic, it was a great cinema movie, as far as a biography of a historical figure. Obviously Denzel Washington killed it as the character Malcolm X. And many people to this day feel like he should have won an Oscar for that, because that was his greatest performance in cinema history, being Malcolm X. And so, going back, Malcolm was in jail. Burgundy was the one who basically elevated his conscience, but it was basically his brother Reginald who convinced him to join the nation. Now, in the Spike Lee movie, there was a guy named Brother Baines, who was a fictional character, but he was kind of like a combination between Burgundy and Reginald. So I guess Spike Lee had some basically a little creative licensing to do that. But that's how Malcolm became who he is as a minister in the Nation of Islam. He joins the Nation of Islam after his over a little bit over a decade years of jail. He joins the Nation of Islam in Harlem. He becomes a prominent minister. He becomes the national spokesman for the Nation of Islam, and he's basically Elijah Muhammad, who is the founder of the Nation of Islam. Well, actually, it's Fraud Muhammad, but Elijah Muhammad basically expanded the Nation of Islam to the different areas across the country and the world. So going back to Malcolm, he becomes Malcolm Little, who was his government name, becomes Malcolm X in the NOI. And he becomes the minister's national spokesman. And things started to shift in 1963. For those who know history, November 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And during that time, Malcolm made some comments about the assassination. The press came to him and asked him about the assassination, and he goes on to talk about the violence that this country has perpetrated amongst Black people here in America, across the world. And his famous lines about the Kennedy assassination was "chickens coming home to roost." That did not bode well with Elijah Muhammad. And Elijah basically silenced Malcolm for his comments because Elijah knew that Malcolm, the nation was going to take flack for that because of what Malcolm said about the Kennedy assassination. So he was silenced. And in that process, there were rumblings of many ministers across the organization that Malcolm was, because of his popularity, he had this idea of taking over when Elijah Muhammad, passes away. And there was a fomenting jealousy between Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X. Unfortunately, for Malcolm, he was silenced. He was restricted to fly anywhere, and they also threw a wedge in between one of Malcolm X's most famous recruits in heavyweight champion boxer Muhammad Ali. So Malcolm in 1964 decided to go to Mecca to make his Hajj, and he made his Hajj and discovered Islam in its truest sense. Now, going back to the Nation of Islam, the Nation of Islam is basically kind of like an offshoot Islamic group, whereas they don't follow the religious traditions of, say, the Orthodox or traditional Islams of the West. When I'm referring to the countries in Asia like Saudi Arabia and such, Jordan and the Arabic countries, Morocco, they practice a different type of Islam, where they feel that fraud Muhammad was Allah on earth, and his messenger was Elijah Muhammad. Well, in traditional Islam, Allah did not come to earth as a person, but Muhammad, who was the 7th century Arabian person who pushed Islam into the world, was his messenger and apparently his last holy apostle. Now, in traditional Islam, they do believe in Jesus. Matter of fact, in the Quran, there are chapters on Jesus. There's a chapter on Jesus, and surprisingly enough, I remember reading, when I first started reading the Quran, there's a whole chapter on Mary. So they do respect Jesus, and they recognize Jesus as the Son of God, as someone who was sent by God. However, they do not claim his deity. They claim him as a prophet, and that's all they claim him as. And in some sects, they don't even believe that Jesus was crucified. They believe that somebody else was crucified in his place. So this is the theology of Islam, the traditional Orthodox Islam. But Malcolm, going back to his Hajj, he discovers this, and he discovers that there were many different peoples in Islam that were Black, that were white, that were Asian. So in that sense, he found a renewed sense of spiritual awareness, where this traditional Islam, and one of the traditional Islams is Sunni, was more suited for him. Well, Malcolm basically was finally excommunicated in 1964 from the Nation of Islam. And then at that point, he started to form his own organization. So he formed a mosque in Harlem that basically dealt with the religious side of Islam. And then he also formed another organization, which was one more the political side, the Afro-American Unity Organization. Well, as Malcolm X, who changed his name summarily to Malik El-Haj Shabazz, there started to become tit for tat between Elijah Muhammad and Minister Malcolm. Elijah basically calling Malcolm a traitor, somebody who was worthy of death, and of the sorts. This, unfortunately, has given a rise out of a lot of people in the Nation of Islam to threaten Malcolm. Malcolm said it himself that, him and his family had several phone calls and death threats. Betty Shabazz, who was Malcolm's widow, basically said that, she got phone calls talking about, and I think in the Spike Lee movie, it portrays it, said that, that Malcolm is one dead red nigga. And she got several phone calls like that. And Malcolm, on the other hand, had to call out Elijah for his hypocritical stance, because as Malcolm was leaving, he also uncovered that Elijah Muhammad had birthed several children out of wedlock, according to him. He had impregnated several secretaries that used to work for Elijah Muhammad, and several other things that Malcolm had uncovered with Elijah Muhammad. And so 64 was a rough time for Malcolm because of the fact that not only was he trying to deal with a lot of the issues of racism in Black America and across the world, because one of the things that Malcolm did when he left the nation was he went to other countries, and especially in Africa, where he got to meet several dignitaries in the African world who were becoming independent of European colonialism. People like Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, Ben Bala in Libya, and several other people who sparked revolutions in Africa. He also sat down with dignitaries like Che Guevara in Cuba and Fidel Castro, who sparked a revolution in Cuba. So Malcolm, not only was he facing the ire of the Nation of Islam, his former organization, with death threats, but he started to become under surveillance with the FBI, the CIA. I think we talked about this in the Fred Hampton piece, COINTELPRO. Well, Malcolm was one of the targets, and he was one of those messianic figures that J. Edgar Hoover was talking about, the rise of a Black Messiah. Malcolm was one of those people that was a possible Messiah. And so during this time, Malcolm was able to, masterfully, kind of maneuver through this year without losing his sanity. Can you imagine, you being surveilled by the government, and then at the same time, your own people are giving you death threats? So, and at the same time, Malcolm was trying to also reconcile with a lot of the civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King, who basically he criticized when he was in the Nation of Islam, because he realized while he was still not a person of the nonviolent way of life, he understood that him and King was actually going for the same goal, despite the fact that they were on two different paths. But and that picture that you're showing was the only time Malcolm and King ever met. They met for a few minutes, and I think that was DC, I believe. And they basically said a couple of things to each other. Nobody really knows what they said. Malcolm sent a letter to Dr. King when he was marching in Mobile, I think, and he knew that Martin was going to be under the attack of certain white racists, and he offered Martin protection. Well, Martin turned it down because he felt like this was not something that Martin Luther King, because he knew if Malcolm sent his bodyguards down there was going to be a fight. And there was going to be deaths. So Martin politely turned him down. When Martin was arrested in Selma, when they were doing the Voting Rights Act, they invited Dr. King. I mean, they invited Malcolm X down there to replace Martin Luther King, who was in jail at the time. Many civil rights leaders were very hesitant of it. Malcolm X had met Coretta Scott King. She really admired him, and she said that Malcolm was very respectful. And he tried to clear the air up with her about the issues between him and her husband, and she was very receptive of him. Well, Malcolm spoke in Mobile right before the Selma March. And then a couple of days later, Malcolm X was unfortunately assassinated on February 21st, 1965, in the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem. Apparently, he was going to speak in that particular meeting. And as soon as he got to the podium, there were men in the audience who basically said, get your hand out of my pocket. And then a riot broke out, and next thing you know, gunshots started flying everywhere, and assailants shot Malcolm on the podium and laid a hell of bullets into his body to make sure he was dead. Now, this was all in front of his wife, his pregnant wife at the time, who was expecting, I think, their third or fourth child, and his daughters, who watched their father become, being gunned down. Now, it was later, several of the assailants were arrested. One was Norman III X Butler. The other was Khalid Islam, and then the other was Thomas Hagen, or Talmadge X Hare, as they call him. All of these three men were charged with the death of Malcolm. They were tried and convicted of murder and were given life sentences. However, in 2021, Norman Butler X was actually paroled, but he was now exonerated of the murder because he felt that he claimed his innocence, and which was interesting. But as far as Thomas Hagen, he confessed to it. But it's an interesting situation when we think about that whole issue of the Nation of Islam people being involved in this whole situation, because also too, much of this was fomented by the action. Well, not the actions, but the speeches that were said about Malcolm and what was written about Malcolm at his departure from the nation, because There was also a cartoon that was approved in Muhammad Speaks, where Malcolm's head was rolling off of his head. Louis X at the time, who is now Minister Louis Farrakhan, claimed that Malcolm also deserved death, as to Elijah Muhammad and several other people in the Nation of Islam, including one John Ali, who was reported to actually be here in Chicago and made a statement on WVON in July of '65, stating that, Malcolm should be killed. And this was well, actually it was 64. I think it was July 64, because this was before Malcolm was killed, stating that Malcolm should be killed. So a lot of tension, a lot of threats. And I think it was a couple of weeks before Malcolm's actual assassination, his house was bombed and was put on fire because the home was owned by the Nation of Islam, and Malcolm was in the process of having his family evicted from that home. Many people from the nation at that time felt like Malcolm was the one that burnt the house down. But, my question is, why would Malcolm burn a house down with his wife and children in there? Because that was the report, that the house was on fire when Malcolm and his wife and children were in the house, which means there was an arsonist who meant to not only just burn the house, but burn the people that was inside of the house. So there were assassination attempts on Malcolm X before his actual assassination. So, and then I will, I'll get into this issue of who killed Malcolm, and what has been uncovered, in the last couple of years. But did you want to say anything or ask any questions?
I'm gonna bring Big Mike up. Yeah, I have a lot of questions. I'm gonna bring up Big Mike first, and then we'll go from here. Thank you, Gardis. Thank you for the introduction of Malcolm X and the history, because a lot of times we don't, realize everything he went through. Even calling him by his name that he had prior to his death, we're still calling him Malcolm X. Thanks for this knowledge. I'm gonna bring up Big Mike. Hey, Big Mike, you're alive?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Sorry about that. I'm in the process of raising some capital for this business, like a couple of medical businesses that we're trying to acquire. And the meeting between me and the investor went
You
well
good?
over.
No,
So
you
my
good.
apologies.
That's okay. That's
Yeah,
okay. I could
that's
use your
something
services.
positive.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, raise that money.
We raised about 100 million thus far.
What? Well, Big Mike, I need you when I'm over here trying to raise the $10 for my live stream.
Well,
Thank you so much.
Accredited investors.
That's amazing. Well, we were still talking about Malcolm X, and Gardis just took us through the intro, so I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to say about Malcolm X.
Forgive me for the loud background noise. I'm on my phone and I'm walking home now, and so just forgive me for the loud background noise. But Malcolm X, also known as Malcolm Little. Well, he's not really known as Malcolm Little. He's known as Malcolm X. Yes, tragedy that he the way he died. Very much so a tragedy.
Yes, and today marks the 60 years of since his assassination. And Gardis was giving us background on who Malcolm X was from the time he was young, and the trials or tribulations he went through there, to when he got with the Nation of Islam, and when he started to find Mecca, when he started to change from the Nation of Islam that's traditional under Elijah Muhammad to I'm sorry, that's not traditional. I'm sorry, Gardis. I'll let Gardis take it up for here. But yeah, from when he transferred from the NOI, I meant to say, to when he started to go to the motherland, he learned so much over there and exposing Elijah Muhammad. And we were just saying, we don't know, we do know, but people have their speculations on who really assassinated Malcolm X. So I'll let Gardis take it away. And you guys can jump in when ready.
Okay. So there have been several, there's the official investigation, and then there's several scholars who have kind of investigated this whole thing. One of them is Zach Kondo, who wrote a book back in the 90s. And I can't remember the name of it, but he used to speak a lot about some of the research that he's done, because he had declassified FBI files on that whole incident. And that was it. The unveiling of the assassination of Malcolm X. Thanks. Also to Carl Evans, and that's Evans as EVANZZ. He also wrote a book called The Judas Factor, which also did the same thing, uncover a lot of things. Now, what they uncovered was, obviously we knew who the triggerman was. I just mentioned their names. One of them was exonerated of it. The other two still serving life sentences in prison. But what they started to uncover was that much of the tension that was fomented between Malcolm and Elijah was fomented by the FBI. I think I remember saying this in the Fred Hampton piece about how they tried to foment a war between the Black Panthers and the Black Keystone Rangers, which didn't work. Well, this unfortunate covert operation did work, because what was discovered was there were several informants in the Nation of Islam, and these informants were the ones who were stoking the tensions against Malcolm X. And these informants that were in the Nation were also the ones that the Nation now accuses of pulling the trigger on Malcolm X. If you listen to Dr. Wesley Muhammad, many of the people in the Nation kind of, they basically shy away from their responsibility of the murder of Malcolm, because for one, they don't want to bring up their responsibility towards fomenting this atmosphere of violence against Malcolm. What's so strange about it was in the 90s, when the remaining family of Malcolm, which is Malcolm's oldest daughter, Itala, I think that's how you spell it, Itala Shabazz, and Betty Shabazz at the time, basically confronted Minister Louis Farrakhan on it, because he was one of the key people who stoke the level of violence towards Malcolm. And Mike Wallace did an interview with Farrakhan and Malcolm X's oldest daughter, Itala, and it was interesting because Farrakhan kind of, he kind of felt sad about it, because of the fact that he had to confront this woman who, she in her young age had to watch her dad get gunned down. And he did admit that he said he did admit that said it. He might have said some things that stoked the violence against Malcolm, and he admitted that. However, when Zach Kondo and Carl Evans and several other people, and also Les Payne, who actually recently passed away not too long ago, he wrote a book called what is it called? It was a nice thick book. Here it is. The Dead Are Rising, The Life of Malcolm X. And they talked about the complicity in the Nation of Islam, with the Nation of Islam. Now, obviously, the trigger men were members of the Newark Mosque. They were registered members of the Newark Mosque. But what they would say, and especially Dr. Wesley Muhammad would say, that these men were kicked out of the nation. Now, there have been several debates on this, but the fact of the matter is that these men were officially members of the nation at one point or another, and they keep saying that there was a point in time when Elijah Muhammad realized that there was so much, there was this violent tension going against Malcolm. I guess he said he ordered a lot of his lieutenants and his ministers not to touch Malcolm. But what they try to explain is that these men were basically rogue elements in the Nation of Islam. I myself feel like a lot of it is deflecting. Now, many people in the Nation of Islam, and I've had discussions with many brothers and even sisters about this, because if you ask them about Malcolm, some of them would be like, and others would, outright be like, no, he wasn't no good. He talked against the Elijah Muhammad. He tried to embarrass him, and many to this day say he deserved death. But I think it goes to a larger issue of how can we agree to disagree? When at the point did differences in ideology became violent opposition? Because this is what's been happening, in this scenario with people from the Nation of Islam. Because what's interesting is, after the death of Malcolm, there were many people who left the nation. They realized that it was something that they didn't want to be a part of, because even people who were still in the nation after Malcolm's excommunication, they still loved Malcolm. They still associated with Malcolm. But then when he was summarily assassinated, they some people was like, no, this is not the organization that we kind of admired and worked with. And even Elijah Muhammad's son, Worth D. Muhammad, who basically took over the nation after Elijah Muhammad's death in 75, I think 75 or 77. And he tried to format it into more of an orthodox Islam, where they stopped believing that the white man was the devil, and he actually invited white people to join the Nation of Islam as well, and they were more orthodox. Well, Louis Farrakhan didn't want no part of that, and he ended up reforming the original Nation of Islam in the early 80s, and this is the Nation of Islam that we get today. And so there's a series of conversations and sometimes arguments when you talk about how the complicity of the Nation of Islam, because what they would also explain too is that Malcolm's death was fomented by, government agencies like the CIA and the FBI, which was in actuality true, because Malcolm himself said that when he trained the Fruit of Islam, when he was in the Nation of Islam, they started getting resources that he never realized that the Nation of Islam had, in their kind of like surveillance, and then, some of the things that they used to threaten Malcolm with. And Malcolm understood, like, they're getting help. They're getting help from an outside source. And obviously he knew it was the government who was doing that. However, the complicity is still on the nation because of the fact that the trigger men were part of the nation. Whether they were part of the nation at that time or not, they were still affiliated with the organization. And so the issue becomes, and this actually is an issue not just with Black people, but it's starting to become an issue in this nation where political and ideological polarization happen to a point where violence is, applied to get across or get their point across to a dominant ideology. And so I really, I really kind of cringe, and I have a hard time discussing it with my brothers in the Nation of Islam, because it seems that critique of Elijah Muhammad is something that is it gives them it pushes a button for them. And I get it. Elijah Muhammad is, he's done a lot of great things as a leader of the nation. He's expanded the Nation of Islam. He's, he's done many great things for Black men who were incarcerated, cleaned them up, was able to, clean their lives up and everything like that. However, none of our leaders should be above critique. And actually, that's including Malcolm as well. I love Malcolm X, but I think there were some things that he did wrong. For one, when he was in the nation, he did critique Dr. King, called him Reverend Chicken and all kind of slanderous names against Dr. King and several other civil rights leaders. And Berg, my thing about name calling is it's not productive. I don't think it gets anybody anywhere when you start name calling people. So I think that was one of his mistakes. And I think another mistake too was actually calling out Elijah Muhammad as well, because he's fighting. Now, many would argue that he did that in self-defense, but then actually you're actually causing a two-front war where now you're warring against the Nation of Islam, but also you're warring against the government who is surveilling you and setting you up to get killed. So Malcolm has made mistakes as well. And I don't think any of our leaders should be above reproach. There should be some critique of all of our leaders. Now, does this mean that we throw them away because of some of the mistakes they made? No. Elijah Muhammad is he has done great things for the Black community. I will never not recognize that. Minister Louis Farrakhan has done many great things for the Black community. He has stood up for the Black community in places where he was challenged by the white establishment. Did he foment, and he admitted this, did he foment violence against Malcolm? Yes. And that was something that should not be above reproach for him. Like, that should be a criticism of him. But at the same time, we have to deal with these contradictions because, listen, Malcolm was not the first person, the first popular leader who was excommunicated from the Nation of Islam because of disagreements with Elijah Muhammad. Soon after Malcolm's assassination, well, actually, not soon after, but his brother Reginald, Malcolm X's younger brother, who actually talked him into the Nation of Islam, was also excommunicated. Now, what was interesting about Reginald was kicked out of the Nation of Islam for, I believe he said, cheating on his wife. And that's something that they don't tolerate. Now, what was sad about it was when Malcolm was in the nation, he had to stop contact from his own brother because of the fact that he was excommunicated. For people who are Jehovah's Witness or know about the Jehovah's Witness, when you're excommunicated from Jehovah's Witnesses don't talk to you. They don't talk to you at all. And so in the Nation of Islam, it's kind of like the same way during that time. So he lost communication with his brother because of the fact that Reginald was excommunicated from the nation. Now, what's interesting is when Malcolm's other brother, Filbert, was also in the nation. And what was sad about that was, and I believe it was when Malcolm was killed, Filbert basically got on the radio and said Malcolm deserved it. And that was the sad part about it. These people were choosing these ideologies over their families. And it was sad because it basically kind of tore families apart. So Malcolm wasn't the first popular minister to be excommunicated because of differences with Elijah Muhammad. Take, for example, the example of Hamas Abdul Khalis. His name was Ernest Timothy McGee. He was actually in the Nation of Islam, but he split in 1957, and he formed his own movement called the Hanafi movement. Now, Khalis was actually the one that converted basketball player at the time, Lou Alcindor, into Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to Islam. He was the one that converted Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to Islam. Well, Khalis also started criticizing Elijah Muhammad and, how much of a fraud he was and such and such. Well, in retaliation, unfortunately, several members from the Philadelphia mosque ended up because Khalis was in DC. There were several members from the Philadelphia mosque who came and murdered his family in 1973. It's called the Hanafi Muslim Massacre. And it was a tragedy because of the fact that there were people from the Nation of Islam who basically murdered his family because of some of the inflammatory things that he was saying about, Elijah Muhammad. Well, the assailants were, captured and tried and sentenced to life in prison. However, and unfortunately, Khalis decided to take matters into his own hands. 4 years later in Washington, D.C., his group takes over 3 buildings in Washington, D.C., and they took like over 100 hostages. And what he wanted was he demanded them to hand over the killers of his family and Malcolm X's killers. But then there was a movie that was supposed to be premiered at that time called Muhammad. And for people that don't know, in Islam, it is forbidden for the Prophet Muhammad to be in any images. But this movie was going to be released, and he wanted the movie canceled. Well, unfortunately, they captured. There was a negotiation, and they basically captured Khalis, and he did, he had to serve a lifetime sentence. But he ended up dying in prison at the time. And I believe Marion Barry was an alderman of DC at that time. So Malcolm wasn't the first one. And then one of the more recent ones, and this was after Elijah Muhammad had passed away, and Louis Farrakhan became the minister. But there was a popular minister named Khalid Muhammad in the 90s. Now, for people who remember Khalid Muhammad, if you remember Night of the Living Bassheads, there was always a guy who was talking, and if you remember that song Night of the Living Bassheads, they said, have you forgotten that when we lost our name, lost our language, we lost our religion and our God, and many of us, by the way we act, we lost our minds? That was Khalid Muhammad. Khalid Muhammad was a very popular minister in the Nation of Islam. However, Khalid Muhammad, I think in 93, did a speech at Kent State, I think. And he basically called out the Jewish establishment about their racist acts against Black folks, and how the Jews were, what they term as bloodsuckers. Well, Farrakhan took a hit on that one and basically suspended Khalid Muhammad, where they tried to reconcile, and Khalid Muhammad never came back. And unfortunately, Khalid Muhammad passed away in the early 2000s of a brain aneurysm. But it was almost the same story as Malcolm X without the gun violence and the assassination attempt, because the split between Khalid Muhammad and Louis Farrakhan was very bad. There were a lot of inflammatory remarks hurled against each other. And so the lesson to be learned in these types of situations is, we can have our ideological differences. We can have different beliefs, different standards, different politics. But do we have to resort to violence in order to win our arguments? Is it, do we have to win over folks? Can we win over folks without killing the opponents? Whether physically, whether emotionally, whether publicly, it's a dog eat dog world out there. You either believe what I say or you're on the other side. I mean, we have come to the point. We have come to the point where many of us believe that you're either with me or against me, and there's no middle ground. There is no, what do you say, Berg? There is no both sides. There's only one side. And I think, to me, that's intellectual laziness. When you don't think of it that way. And I'm not saying that people don't have their preferences or biases. I do believe that everybody has a bias. However, it's how you handle it and how you handle your opposition that makes it that makes it more humane to deal with. I can have discussions with people who are different faiths, people who have different political ideologies. But the thing is that as long as we respect each other's thought processes, then we should be fine. And for one to critique, like, say, for instance, me, I mean, there's a lot that people can critique me for. There's a lot that people can critique of the organizations that I belong to. Just say, for instance, me, I'm a practicing Roman Catholic. But if somebody comes to me and says, the Roman Catholic Church is racist, yes, I know that. The Roman Catholic Church participated in slavery. Yes, I know that as well. The Roman Catholic Church has sexual abuses in its clergy. Yes, I know that as well. And they tried to cover it up. I know all of this. And I don't run from it. Unlike some of my brothers from the Nation of Islam who try to run from the Malcolm X situation. And so I think we can promote these ideas better if we confront these contradictions. Yes, no organization is perfect. Yes, there will be mistakes made. And yes, there are crimes that some of these organizations, like the Catholic Church, have to pay for. But I mean, this is why, people like me and several other people who participate in this, we confront the bishops, we confront the priests who try to protect the institution. Philosophies and their own religious dogmas.
I think
not the way you're operating in, huh?
Okay, we were freezing up. Go right ahead, Gardis. I'm sorry.
Okay. But not the way we're operating in this sense, because if we keep making excuses for many of these organizations, then we'll never get justice, and we'll never get the people into these spaces to deal with these contradictions. So I believe that we have to have more critical thought on certain things and confront these issues that we try to sweep under the rug, because the longer we put them away, the bigger the problem gets. And so we just really, really need to confront these issues.
I agree. Big Mike has a question for you. My question to Gardis is, what is his thoughts on the Netflix documentary on Malcolm X? Did you see that, Gardis?
I saw maybe the first 2 episodes. One of the problems I did have with it is Dr. Skip Gates was the producer on it. I'm not a big fan of Skip Gates. And when just like I was saying, when I just kind of disagree with you on a lot of things, I just kind of turn away. I'm not going to be here on a live to curse Skip Gates out or anything like that, because Skip Gates is going to do what he's going to do. But what I've saw from it, basically, it did go into many of the issues within the Nation of Islam that fomented the death of Malcolm. However, I don't think it went deep enough into the complicity of the government, CIA, the FBI, who actually assisted in the assassination of Malcolm. So to me, it just didn't go that much in depth into it.
His second question is, what do you think about Dick Gregory comment on Pio? How do I say that?
Pia Gamma Pinto being the reason why. Dick Gregory, and maybe, I don't know if he made this comment towards the end of his life, but I don't know if Dick Gregory's, and don't get me wrong, Dick Gregory was a great man, did a lot of great things, but I recognize towards the end of his life, he was saying a lot of outlandish things. So I just kind of let that go. So I don't know, Big Mike, if he said that towards the end of his life or, somewhere before that. I don't know. I think one of the reasons Malcolm was killed, not just with his confrontation with the Nation of Islam, but Malcolm was, I would categorize him more as a human rights activist. And when he started associating with some of the foreign leaders who had just completed autonomy from their European colonizers, I think that became a danger to, Malcolm became a danger, because Malcolm X was also talking about bringing the United States to the United Nations, coming to the United Nations court, charging the United States of genocide of Black people in this country. And so I think that's what really drew a lot of negative attention to Malcolm from our own government.
Okay. Do you have time to and thank you everyone who joined the discussion. Thank you, Foxy Moon Premiers. Thank you everyone that's here. You have time to watch this quick article from Eyewitness News 7. It says Malcolm X family calls for the declassification of assassination files on his 60th death anniversary, and that was published today.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's watch it together. Just gonna pull it up. All right, StreamYard. Every time we talk about something important, here they go. Okay, let's go.
Pushing for the declassification of years later, and on the anniversary of his killing, his family is pushing for the declassification of documents in the investigation surrounding the death of Malcolm X.
They say there are facts out there that can tell the full story. Here's Marcus Solis.
JFK, RFK, MLK. We need to add Malcolm X.
It's a demand for answers that Malcolm X's family and lawyers have made before, but now they hope the political circumstances are different. On the 60th anniversary of the assassination of the civil rights leader, in the very room where the killing took place, attorney Ben Crump called for the government to declassify files related to the case.
It's almost as if you're putting together the puzzle, but a chunk of the puzzle is missing because individuals on the other side of the room are holding the puzzle pieces behind their back.
Malcolm X was shot 21 times by multiple gunmen during a speech in the Audubon Ballroom. In 2021, 2 men convicted of the crime were exonerated. The family has long alleged the then 39-year-old was the victim of a government conspiracy and cover-up, and last year filed a $150 million lawsuit against the Department of Justice, the FBI, CIA, and the NYPD.
It has been a challenge, but we are going to have a lot of faith that we will be able to vindicate his assassination.
Last month, President Trump signed an executive order calling for the release of files related to the assassinations of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King. Trump says Malcolm X's case should be among them.
Of course, they targeted Malcolm X. These records will lay that bare.
On May 19th, the family will mark what would have been Malcolm X's 100th birthday. They hope to have the files and the information they seek by then. In Washington Heights, Marcus Solis, Channel 7, Eyewitness News.
Wow, what do you think about that? I was shocked to see.
We are not beholden to anyone. I'm beholden.
I was shocked to see Ben Crump pop up, but not really. That's different. Is he a human rights? Because Foxy Moon was saying that they need a human rights attorney. Would be qualified, I guess, Ben Crump? But I'm shocked. I am a little. I'm watching it with you. So Ben Crump is there, and so why do you think? Keefus said Trump has referenced the release of the JFK, RFK, and MLK files. Why did they leave Malcolm X out?
Well, I mean, obviously because of the fact that the trigger men, who I talked about, they want to kind of isolate it to that particular aspect of the assassination. And this was the problem I had with the Netflix documentary, that it didn't go, I mean, it made mention of it, but it didn't go deep into, the big overall picture. And unfortunately, like I said, my brothers and sisters in the Nation of Islam, they mythologize the deeper conspiracy and try to push the narrative away from, the Nation of Islam's complicity, which unfortunately, when you're talking about the death of Malcolm, you can't separate, or you can't take out the Nation of Islam's complicity and leave in the Alphabet Boys' complicity, CIA, FBI, and also, as the report said, the New York Police Department, which there were many people from the Red Squad, which is the undercover unit that was across the nation to destabilize a lot of these groups and organizations that included civil rights organizations, were in attendance during Malcolm X's assassination, and they were in the area. But you can't separate the two. Those two, if you're talking about the death of Malcolm X, those two go hand in hand. The Nation of Islam and the Alphabet Boys, because these were the people who conspired to kill him. But unfortunately, the way I do look at it, and I think some even kill people would say that, and you know what, I can even believe this from some people who are in the nation who would not necessarily absolve themselves from it, but they do feel like, some people feel like they were used by the government to kill Malcolm. Now, on a level, I can't accept that, because sometimes the government will foment these wars against us, and they would foment violence against a lot of us, and especially our leaders, especially leaders that were influential like Malcolm. And so I can get with that particular issue, but to, completely absolve yourself from this crime that doesn't fly with me.
I can understand that. And I'm just speaking of Malcolm X and the way you're speaking upon it, and the organizations mixed with the alphabet people, as we say, this is very reminiscent. 5 years later, Chairman Fred Hampton and his organization, not organization, but I guess that's an agent provocateur that came in. I don't know if the three men that assassinated Malcolm X, did he know them, do you think?
Well, yeah, I think Malcolm definitely knew who his killers were.
Okay.
But we also have to, sometimes we also have to, something we said on our last live, to get the language right, because there's a difference between being an agent and being an informant.
Okay.
Now, there are informants in like, say, the Nation of Islam. And when you look at informants are basically people who are not officially like trained FBI agents, like they didn't go to Quantico and get their training. There were people who like law enforcement, basically like William O'Neill. William O'Neill was an informant. O'Neill basically got caught up with the law, for stealing a car and doing other crimes, and he had this whole sentence over his head. So they made a deal with him to infiltrate the Black Panthers and Fred Hampton to give back information to the FBI. That's an informant. An agent is somebody who was trained in the FBI to infiltrate a group. So, and this is a point of contention amongst people from the Nation of Islam, and also scholars who like Zach Kondo and Les Payne talk about John Ali. John Ali was one of the spokesmen for the Nation of Islam for Elijah Muhammad at the time. John Ali has a background in working for the government. He was actually, if I can remember, he worked in, was it naval intelligence or something like that before he joined the Nation. So he has he actually has a background in military operation intelligence because of the fact that he was in the military at one point. But there's speculation that he was one of the agents. Like he was literally an agent. He was actually militarily trained. So he was the only agent that they knew from the Nation. But I'm going to say this from a personal standpoint. So I don't know if you remember, but back in 2015, they did this 20th anniversary of the Million Man March that happened in 1995. I actually went to the Million Man March in 95. I didn't go to the one in 2015. However, what they did was they formed these committees called the Justice or Else Committee that I was invited to be at. However, and we used to have our meetings over at the mosque on Stony Island. And we had our meetings at the mosque in Stony Island in Muhammad University building. And it was basically kind of like an open invitation to a lot of people. But me and a couple of other people who I know closely started noticing strange people coming to these meetings. One person literally said that he was, he used to work for the Chicago Police Department. And there were people who would come to the meetings for a couple of weeks and then disappear, for the next couple of weeks and then come back and they wouldn't say anything. Some people were very vocal or a little too rah-rah about certain things. And we started noticing like, these are some weird people coming in here. Well, somebody tipped us off like, oh yeah, these are informants who are just coming in and just trying to pick up on our conversations of what we're going to do. Mm-hmm. And what was so interesting is, and this was before, so I don't know if you remember back in 2014, the big protests that happened on Michigan Avenue after the killing of Laquan McDonald. Mm-hmm. But I was there as an observer, and I saw how the police could not handle those crowds. The crowds, I mean, they came from all sides. It was just something that the police were not ready for. And they basically took over the Mag Mile at that time for that protest. Now, that next year, we were planning on doing the same thing. However, one of my concerns was there were people who was listening to our conversations. And I was telling them at that time, I said, listen, we need to change up our strategies because of the fact that whatever we did last year, they're going to have a busload of more police from all districts, all precincts, and they're going to be ready. So I think we need to come up with a unique strategy than what we did before, because what we did last year is not going to work. Well, people was like, no, what we did last year worked. And I was like, okay. So when we got down there, yes, there were busloads of police down there ready to protect the Mag Mile. And I literally said, I'm like, there are people listening to us. There are people here who are about to take this information back to the police force because they've already been planning, this for a whole year. But obviously, they tried to do the same thing, and most of it didn't work. And what I did say, because when I went down there, I started observing some streets that were not being occupied by police. And I told some folks like, hey, listen, why don't y'all, because sometimes you had to make a nice little walk to go around certain buildings. But I feel like if we can come out this way, then then we could make something happen. And there were some people who came on like sides of the streets that the police weren't prepared to defend. And I thought that was our opportunity, but I think some other people kind of like took over that advantage and was able to, to do something different. But yeah, being in that organization, being in that group, I did notice a lot of informants and maybe an agent that was in those circles. And one of the things that I take issue with, especially with the Nation, even though I love the organization, I love the people in there, sometimes I feel, and maybe I might be wrong, but I just don't feel like they vet their people enough to see if they are informants or if they're agents at that. And I think there's a lot of infiltration going on with that, with that particular organization. So mark my words when I say this. I pray for them, when Minister Louis Farrakhan makes his transition, because I think it's going to be ugly, whoever the leader is. Now, the problem is that there's a group of people who feel like one minister should be the rightful heir, and then there's a group that feels like another minister who should be, the heir. But I don't know. I think that's gonna be an ugly fight, and I pray that they don't. That I'm hoping that I'm wrong on that, but I don't feel like that's gonna go over well.
I understand. May I ask a question? Going back to Malcolm X and how, I know this may be a silly question, but and the meeting, I want to go back to when Farrakhan met Betty Shabazz and her daughter, Malcolm X's daughter. Have you heard any of his descendants or children still communicating with NOI, like Malcolm X side, or being a part of any of their movements?
No, not really.
Okay.
But I don't know. I mean, maybe they might be communicating. I don't know. But publicly, I have the last public display was when, maybe it was a Savior's Day, because Betty Shabazz made a public appearance with Minister Louis Farrakhan, and it basically looked like they were kind of reconciling their differences. So and that was like in the 90s. I think that was like 96 or something. So
yeah,
1995. That was the last time. And I have to say this, and this is this is way off topic. But Malcolm X's daughters were fine.
Oh yeah, he has beautiful children.
He has some fine daughters.
Yeah, he really. They are beautiful. When I saw his daughter sitting there next to Ben Crump, I was like, man, she's absolutely gorgeous. I had to Google her age. Like, wait a minute, how old was she? But and actually, I will say, Minister Farrakhan, all of his children are just beautiful. Yeah, the daughters are just gorgeous, gorgeous. So, yeah, that's a plus. I don't know. I think that was a bright note. I thought that was some bright. Yeah. And we have to give some credit to Betty Shabazz for that. Okay.
Yeah. I know Betty in her younger years was. Look, Malcolm. Look, I think Keith. What was that? Wyoming girl was like Malcolm was a nice looking man, and Malcolm ain't gonna marry no wombat. Betty Shabazz was fine.
Yeah, and I was looking at the research in Malcolm X today, and when they said he was assassinated at 39, I said he was so young. We see all the leaders that we look up to this day. We're like, man, they didn't even make it to,
Yeah, they didn't look. Same thing with King. 39. He died at 39 because Malcolm was older than King. So, and he dies 4 years later, or 3 years later. 3 years later from Malcolm. Yeah, both both slain at 39 years old. They didn't even make it to 40.
Yeah.
Well, heck,
And-
Fred Hampton didn't even make it to. He didn't make it to 22 years old.
Yeah, it's true. It's sad. So for those that asking, we're gonna go ahead and just People Magazine actually did an article on Malcolm X's 6 children, and here they are. I'll put the link here so you can see Atala Shabazz.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Am I saying right? Kubila Shabazz.
Mm-hmm.
Shabazz, 66.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Ayaza Shabazz, 62. My goodness, they are just beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Gamila Lumaba Shabazz, 60. And that's Ben Crump. Lord protect them. Betty Shabazz and her daughters here. Just a beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful girls.
Yeah. And I was like, and look, even in their 60s,
they are beautiful.
Even in their 60s.
The young lady with the pink lipstick, is that they were twins. Malika and Malak are twins. Okay.
Yeah, they were still in the womb when their father was killed.
Oh wow. So that's Malika and Malak with the sunglasses on, I believe. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. A strong woman, Betty Shabazz is.
Yeah. And Malcolm had all daughters.
All girls.
Ooh, yeah. You know what? That especially the way they look, it's like, oh my God, I don't know what I would look. I got one daughter, and it's like she's a handful. She is a handful.
Oh yeah. One, you got one, and you're like, wow, 6?
Yeah, I know. I only got one, and that's a handful. So.
Oh wait, I can't hear you. Hold on.
Uh-oh.
Well, I can't hear you.
Yeah, your sound changed.
Hold on 1 second. It's probably me. Sorry. Let me mute this. Okay, Gardis, can you say something?
Something. Can you hear me? Hello? Uh-oh.
I'm sorry, guys. I don't know what happened. I can't hear anything, and it's probably me. I was fine a second ago, and then I can't hear anything for some reason. I'm gonna let Gardis say something one more time.
Can the chat hear me?
Okay. Nope, I can't hear him.
Can the chat hear me? Hello?
Gardis StreamYard is really messing up. Hold on 1 second. Let me go here. Go to my audio. Okay. It said I'm supposed to hear you, so I'm sorry. I can't hear you. Okay, so Tracy, you hear Gardis. Okay, sorry, Keepers. I don't know what happened. Maybe it's, can y'all hear me okay?
Can y'all hear Berg?
Okay. I am so sorry, Gardis. I am so sorry. I think maybe, I don't know, did Martin Luther King daughters get mad at me and just cut off my sound? I don't know. We gotta talk about everybody.
So apparently they can hear you in the chat. We can hear both.
And I think something just happened with StreamYard, so I can't hear you, Gardis, but if you have anything parting to say, go right ahead. We appreciate Gardis Watts. StreamYard, you really are terrible when we talk about something important. This is what happens. Thank you, Gardis, for giving us so much education today. Thank you so much. You have a great night. Peace. All right, y'all. I know you can't hear me. So, you can hear me. I'm going to say good night. And I thank y'all so much. Have a wonderful evening. And put the light bulbs in the chat for Gardis Watts if you can hear me. Thank you so much, guys. Take care of yourself and each other, okay? And I'll talk to you soon. So sorry about what's happening with the StreamYard. Bye.
Commentary Blue Commentary Burgundy Commentary Commentary Blue Commentary Burgundy Blue Commentary.